Okay, so you want to own a Chuck E. Cheese. Kids never stop asking to go. Birthdays book themselves. Parents pay for an hour of quiet. It sounds like the safest business in America. It is not. You need $800,000 in cash just to apply. Sign the deal, and you take on debt you never chose. The tickets never run out, but something else always does. By the end, you'll know where the money goes, who almost destroyed this company, and why the sign lies to you. Stick around for this one. Subscribe. Let's start with the cost to get in. What it costs to get in. Here's the first number that throws people off. Chuck E. Cheese wants $800,000 in liquid assets before you spend a dollar on the business itself. On top of that, they want a net worth of $1,500,000. They've learned that undercapitalized operators default in year 2, not year 10. Clear that bar, and the initial franchise fee alone runs up to $800,000. That fee buys you exactly one thing: the right to use the name. It doesn't include a building, it doesn't include a kitchen, it doesn't include a single arcade cabinet. Add construction, leasehold improvements, and the arcade build-out, and total investment lands between $1,170,000 and $1,830,000. Some franchise sources now put larger, newer builds as high as $4,100,000 once you factor in premium real estate and bigger footprints. Arcade machines, redemption games, and kitchen equipment alone can run $500,000 to $1 million of that total. That's not decoration, that's the actual product. Here's what almost nobody registers on the way in. You are not primarily financing a restaurant. A commercial pizza oven costs a fraction of a single modern redemption game, and a Chuck E. Cheese location runs roughly 75 of those games at once, rotated constantly, because kids get bored of a machine faster than they get bored of pizza. And once the doors open, the spending doesn't stop. Franchisees owe a continuing royalty of 4 to 6% of gross sales. Add another 1 to 3% for a marketing fund you don't control. Every single month before you've paid your own staff, a slice of your revenue is already gone. Over a 15-year franchise term, that royalty alone can outweigh the entire initial franchise fee several times over. It quietly becomes the biggest line item you never see spelled out in a brochure. Financing rarely comes from one source. A typical structure pairs an SBA loan for leasehold improvements and working capital with a separate equipment loan for the arcade and kitchen. That equipment loan matters more than it sounds. Lenders only extend it against resale value, and a 5-year-old redemption game with last year's licensed characters on the cabinet doesn't hold value the way a commercial oven does. Some documented deals put the cash equity injection around $150,000 on top of well over $1 million in combined SBA and equipment financing. Monthly debt payments on a build like that can run close to $15,000 before a single employee is hired. Break-even often lands 18 to 24 months out. Converting an existing family entertainment center instead of building new can shift that math, since the building shell and parking are often already in place. But that shortcut only works when you're converting from a similar concept. Turn a bare strip mall unit into a commercial kitchen, a party wing, and 75 rotating arcade cabinets from scratch, and costs climb toward the top of the range fast. There's one more cost most first-time applicants miss entirely: timing risk. Construction on a build of this size typically runs 6 to 12 months. Every month of delay is a month of debt service with zero revenue coming in to offset it. A permitting delay on a trampoline zone or a commercial kitchen hookup doesn't just push your opening date back. It quietly adds tens of thousands of dollars in carrying costs before you've served a single customer. So before a single customer walks in, you've committed over $1 million. You've agreed to hand over a slice of every future dollar. And you've built something structurally closer to an arcade with a kitchen attached than a restaurant with some games in the corner. And that's before you've thought about staffing it. A location this size needs a kitchen crew, a floor crew watching 75 machines, and a separate team just for birthday parties on weekends. Most first-time franchisees budget for the pizza. Very few budget for the sheer number of people it takes to keep a building this complicated running smoothly every single day. Which raises the obvious question: if the games are the real investment, is that also where the real money comes from? How the money flows? The answer sits in the company's own financial filings, and it isn't close. In one fiscal year, company-operated venues brought in $890,095,000 in total sales. Food and beverage sales accounted for $390,891,000. Entertainment and merchandise sales, meaning games, redemption, and prizes, brought in $499,204,000. Sit with that. The games out-earned the pizza by more than $108 million in a single single year. Now follow what it cost to deliver each dollar. Cost of food and beverage that year was $90,582,000 against $390,891,000 in food sales. That's about 23 cents spent for every food dollar earned. Cost of entertainment and merchandise was $40,967,000 against $499,204,000 in entertainment sales. That's about 8 cents spent for every entertainment dollar earned. Read those two numbers side by side. The pizza costs almost 3 times as much as a share of its own revenue to deliver as a round of skee-ball does. Here's the part that reframes everything. The pizza isn't really the product. The pizza is the reason a parent says yes. It makes the trip feel like a meal instead of a bribe. Once that parent says yes and walks through the door, the real engine is a card swipe, a ticket dispenser, and a prize counter stocked with toys that cost pennies to source. Look closer at how that entertainment dollar gets collected, and the gap gets harder to argue with. A Play Pass card carries a small activation fee before a single game is played. Loading extra play points onto that card runs a set price per credit. And here's the detail that rarely gets said out loud. A guest who doesn't want to earn tickets through gameplay at all can simply buy them outright for pennies apiece. The entire skill layer of the arcade, the aiming, the timing, the button mashing, is technically optional. The business built a cash override for the one part of the experience that costs it nothing to sell. But margin on paper isn't cash in your pocket. Staffing a single location runs into the hundreds of thousands a year because you're really staffing 3 businesses at once: the kitchen, the game floor, and the party rooms. A weekend birthday block alone can require its own dedicated host, separate from the general floor staff, because a party package promises a live show and a reserved table, not just a table and a swipe card. Add lease costs, insurance, and the corporate advertising assessment, and total operating costs for the company's venues came to $639,230,000 against $890,095,000 in venue sales that year. That leaves $250,865,000 before corporate overhead, before equipment depreciation, and before one more line item that quietly ate more than the entire operating profit of the company. This is the number a franchisee never sees broken out anywhere in a sales brochure, and it's the number that actually determines whether the whole system survives a bad year. Notice what's missing. Not a bad location, not a weak menu, not even a slow year. The biggest threat to that $250,865,000 was never sitting inside a single restaurant at all. That line item is interest expense. For most of the company's history, it barely existed. Chuck E. Cheese ran on its own cash, answered to its own shareholders, and owed nothing to anyone beyond the ordinary cost of running restaurants. That's not the company you're looking at today. The hidden costs. Then something changed. On a single afternoon in February 2014, this company stopped owing nothing to anyone. It agreed to take on debt it never needed, to fund a purchase it had no say in. That afternoon, the company's parent, then called CEC Entertainment, was taken private for about $1,300,000,000, including debt. The buyer was Apollo Global Management, one of the largest private equity firms in the world. Here's the part most customers and most franchisees never think about. Apollo didn't pay that $1,300,000,000 out of its own pocket. In a leveraged buyout, the buyer borrows most of the purchase price, then loads that debt directly onto the company it just bought. CEC Entertainment, not Apollo, became responsible for paying it back. Of the roughly $1.4 billion in total consideration, Apollo's own funds put in about $350 million in equity. The rest, north of $1 billion, came from loans and bonds that CEC itself now owed. Think about what that means. The pizza, the games, the birthday parties, the 8-cent entertainment margin. All of it was now servicing a debt load that had nothing to do with running a family entertainment company. It existed to finance someone else's purchase, and the debt was enormous. By the time the pandemic hit, CEC carried more than $900 million in obligations. In one pre-pandemic fiscal year alone, operating income came to $50,198,000. Interest expense that same year was $87,243,000. The debt didn't just eat the profit, it ate nearly double the profit, then kept eating. The result was a net loss of $28,923,000 in a year the restaurants themselves were making money. This is the villain of the story. Not a delivery app skimming a cut, not a landlord raising rent, a financing structure. Apollo does to Chuck E. Cheese what a mortgage on someone else's house does to a renter who never signed the loan. Franchisees kept paying royalties on cratering revenue, tied to a parent company that owed money it never spent building a single restaurant. Think about how strange that arrangement really is. A franchisee running a location location in a suburban strip mall had no vote in the 2014 buyout. They took on none of the $1.3 billion purchase price. They never saw a cent of it. But when the parents' debt load helped drag the brand into bankruptcy court, that franchisee's territory rights, supply chain, and marketing fund landed in the same courtroom too. That's the part of a leveraged buyout that never makes the pitch deck. The debt doesn't stay with the people who chose to take it on. It attaches to everyone downstream. The operator who signed a 15-year lease in good faith, the manager running Saturday birthday parties, the family who prepaid for a party package the week the filing hit the news. None of them sat in the room where the deal was negotiated. All of them felt its aftershock. Then March 2020 arrived, and every location shut at once. A company already buckling under interest payments larger than its operating income lost its entire revenue stream overnight. On June 25, 2020, CEC Entertainment filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing more than $900 million in debt. Weeks before that filing went public, the company approved retention bonuses for its top executives. CEO David McKillips received $1,300,000. President Roger Cardinale received $900,000. CFO Jay Howell received $675,000. The people at the top, about to ask a bankruptcy court for relief, were paid first. The court approved a reorganization that December. Ownership passed from Apollo to a group of creditors led by investment firms Monarch Alternative Capital and Redon Advisors, who agreed to erase roughly $705 million in debt in exchange for control of the company. Apollo itself never filed for bankruptcy and bore none of that debt directly. That's the whole design of a leveraged buyout. Interestingly, though, one of Apollo's own former senior partners later returned to CEC's new board after the restructuring. The fund's exposure to the company's collapse was always smaller than the company's exposure to the fund's decision to buy it in the first place. So the arcade survived, the pizza survived. $705 million in debt did not. And the real question isn't whether the company recovered, it's what actually changed on the other side of that reorganization, because the answer isn't just recovery, it's a completely different business model, wearing the same mascot costume. And speaking of which, if stories like this one, where the real business is hiding behind the one on the sign, are your kind of thing, this is a good moment to hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this coming. But here is one thing that you miss. You've probably walked into a Chuck E. Cheese believing you were walking into a restaurant that happens to have games. You weren't. Chuck E. Cheese isn't a pizza restaurant. It's a casino built for people too young to legally enter one, dressed in a mascot costume so that handing your child a loaded card feels like parenting instead of enabling a habit. Every mechanic in the building supports that. Tickets aren't currency. They're a variable reward, handed out in inconsistent amounts by machines designed to make winning feel skill-based even when it's mostly chance. Extra tickets can even be bought outright for pennies apiece, which means the win a child celebrates at the prize counter can just be something a parent paid for twice. Once to play, once to skip the losing. And the pizza's job was never to make money. Its job was to be the alibi. It's the thing that lets a parent tell themselves this is a family meal, not 90 minutes of supervised risk-taking for a 9-year-old. That's why food costs almost 3 times as much as a share of its own revenue to deliver as the games do. The kitchen isn't there for profit, it's there to make the trip feel justified. But here's the twist that completes the reframe, and it's happening right now. Chuck E. Cheese isn't just a casino wearing a pizza costume anymore, it's converting into a subscription business. The company piloted a paid membership program in a small handful of stores in early 2024. By August of that year, it had rolled the program out nationwide under the name Fun Pass, with tiers priced between $7.99 and $29.99 a month. By the time of the national launch, the company said it had already sold more than 350,000 passes. Every membership carries a minimum 12-month commitment before a family can cancel. Think about what that shift means for the model. A one-time visitor is a transaction. A member is a recurring line of revenue that shows up whether or not the family visits that month. The exact logic that runs a gym, a streaming platform, or a mobile game with a battle pass. It's worth comparing that to the nearest competitor. Dave & Buster's runs a near-identical card swipe, ticket and prize system for an adult crowd and has leaned on the same insight for years. The game's floor, not the kitchen, is the real margin engine. What Chuck E. Cheese is attempting now is the family market version of that same realization, layered onto a customer base that visits in multi-year cycles tied to a child's age, not a repeat visit cycle tied to a Friday night. That makes the membership bet riskier, and if it works, stickier, Because a family that locks in a membership when their child is 5 is a family pre-sold on years 2, 3, and 4 as well. The company has also been putting real money into renovations, adding trampoline zones and active play areas built specifically to extend how long a family stays once they've already paid to get in. Compare that to the old model, where the average visit had a natural ceiling. Kids get tired, tokens run out, parents check the time, a trampoline zone resets that clock, giving families a second reason to stay past the point where the arcade alone would have sent them home. Longer visits mean more food orders, more play points reloaded, and more exposure to the membership pitch at checkout. The business you thought you understood was a restaurant with an arcade attached. The business that actually exists is a variable reward entertainment system, financed by other people's debt for most of its recent history, now being rebuilt around membership revenue instead of one-off visits. That shift changes who wins in this business. And it isn't necessarily the operator standing behind the counter who actually makes money. Not every operator in this system is fighting the same uphill climb. The ones who win share a pattern that has almost nothing to do with loving pizza or loving kids. Meet Rashid Okafor. 12 years ago, he managed a single 40-machine arcade inside a shopping center in Lagos, Nigeria, with no ties to any American franchise at all. He'd never run food service. He'd never run a franchise of any kind. In 2015, he signed on as a sub-operator under a regional master franchisee bringing Chuck E. Cheese into West Africa, starting with one location inside a mall in Lagos. He kept his food revenue and his game revenue tracked as two separate businesses from day one, staffing and forecasting each side differently instead of collapsing them into a single number. By 2019, he'd taken over a second location and renegotiated his lease into a percentage rent structure tied to his own sales, instead of a flat annual increase. That single change protected him during a currency devaluation 2 years later, when a flat rent competitor 2 blocks away had to close. Today, he holds development rights across 3 countries, operating 11 locations with combined annual revenue above $19 million. The pattern behind operators like him breaks into a few specific habits. First, they treat the birthday party program as the core product, not a side offering. A party booking arrives with guaranteed attendance, guaranteed food orders, and a guaranteed multi-hour visit locked in weeks before the date on the calendar. Second, they lean into the membership shift instead of resisting it. Converting a family from occasional walk-ins into a paying member removes that family from the pool of customers who might choose a competitor on any given Saturday because the spending decision is already made and paid for. Third, they run multi-unit territories instead of single locations because fixed costs, corporate marketing assessments, and equipment refresh cycles get cheaper per location once spread across 3, 5, or 10 stores instead of 1. Fourth, they track food revenue and entertainment revenue as 2 separate businesses internally, the way Rashid did from his very first location, because collapsing them into one number hides which side of the building is actually paying the bills. Fifth, they negotiate lease terms tied to their own performance. Franchise agreements typically run a 15 to 20-year initial term, which means a bad lease signed in year 1 compounds into a structural disadvantage for over a decade and a half. Operators who tie rent to their own sales, instead of a flat escalating number, are the ones still standing when a slow year hits. Notice what none of these habits involve. Not a secret menu tweak, not a marketing gimmick, not some special talent for entertaining children. Every one of them is a decision about money, how it's tracked, how it's financed, and how it's protected when things go wrong. None of this requires an operator to be an expert in animatronics or arcade repair. It requires understanding that the games floor, the birthday calendar, and the membership program are the actual business, and the pizza kitchen is supporting cast, keeping the story believable. Rashid still checks his food cost percentage every week. He just knows it isn't the number that decides whether his 11 locations turn a profit. Look at where new locations are actually opening, and the pattern confirms itself. Domestic growth in the United States has slowed to a handful of new corporate-built stores a year. The international pipeline, run almost entirely through area development agreements with regional master operators like Rashid, is where the unit count keeps climbing. That isn't an accident of geography. It's what happens when a franchisor learns the hard way, which operators can absorb a bad quarter and which ones can't. Which brings us to the number that actually decides whether any of this works out for the person who signs the franchise agreement in the first place. Let's close the loop with 2 real scenarios built from the numbers already on the table. Scenario 1, the single unit operator. You open one Chuck E. Cheese at the low end of the investment range, putting in $1,170,000 to open the doors. Your location does $1,600,000 in annual revenue. Applying the company's own cost ratios, food costs run 23% of food revenue and entertainment costs run 8% of entertainment revenue. Split your revenue 44% food, 56% entertainment, matching the company average. That's $704,000 in food sales against $161,920 in food costs and $896,000 in entertainment sales against $71,680 in entertainment costs. Combined cost of goods, $233,600. That leaves $1,366,400 before labor, lease, royalties, and overhead. Subtract labor at 30% of revenue, $480,000. Lease at 12%, $192,000. On size, franchise royalties and marketing fund contributions at a combined 8%, $128,000. Insurance, utilities, and general operating costs at 15%, $240,000. A total expenses beyond cost of goods, $1,040,000. What you keep? $326,400. It's set against your $1,170,000 investment. That's a 27.9% return in a strong year. It sounds excellent until you remember this operator has no membership base, no multi-unit efficiency, and full exposure if a competitor opens 2 miles away. Scenario 2. The multi-unit operator running the membership model. You operate 3 locations in one metro area, each doing $1,800,000 in annual revenue for $5,400,000 combined. A meaningful share of your customers now hold a paid membership, generating revenue that doesn't depend on any single Saturday's foot traffic. Because you're spreading fixed costs, marketing assessments, and equipment refresh cycles across 3 locations, your combined expense ratio beyond cost of goods drops from 65% of revenue to 58%. Using the same 44/56 split and the same company cost ratios, your combined cost of goods comes to $787,320. Your combined expenses beyond that come to $3,132,000. What you keep across all 3 locations, $1,480,680 against a combined investment of $3,600,000. That's a 41.1% return. And unlike Scenario 1, this operator has membership revenue that doesn't reset to 0 every time a family skips a week. Now run Scenario 1 through 1 bad year. A competitor opens 12 minutes away. Foot traffic drops 18%. Revenue falls from $1,600,000 to $1,312,000 because most of your costs, lease, royalties, insurance, staffing minimums, don't shrink as fast as revenue does. What you keep doesn't fall by 18%. It falls by 46%, down to $176,256. That operator, with no membership cushion and no second location to average against, just watched their return cut nearly in half by one nearby opening. Run the same shock against Scenario 2. The multi-unit operator loses foot traffic at only one of 3 locations, since a competitor can't open 12 minutes from all 3 at once. Combined revenue falls by 6% instead of 18%. Because a real share of that base is locked into memberships already paid for, a meaningful chunk of revenue doesn't move at all. What that operator keeps falls to $1,289,632, a decline of 12.9% against the single operator's 46% collapse. The gap between these 2 operators isn't luck, and it isn't location. It's whether you built a business around single visits or around the membership relationship the company itself is now betting its entire turnaround on. Zoom out, and the same math explains why Apollo's debt load was so dangerous in the first place. A single location with volatile visit-by-visit revenue can absorb a bad quarter. A company with hundreds of millions in fixed debt payments spread across hundreds of locations having simultaneously bad quarters cannot. Scale doesn't just multiply the upside in this business. It multiplies the exposure to exactly the kind of shock scenario one just walked through. Chuck E. Cheese has survived for nearly 50 years. It survived the shift from tokens to cards. It survived a leveraged buyout that loaded close to $1 billion of debt onto a company that never asked for it. It survived a bankruptcy filing in the middle of a pandemic that shut every location at once. It survived because of something a delivery app or a discount arcade can never replicate, a specific kind of controlled chaos that convinces a 9-year-old they just won something. and convinces their parent that $90 bought 2 hours of quiet. That's worth something. But it's also the trap hiding underneath the mascot costume. Because the thing that makes this business resilient, the variable rewards, the ticket counter, the birthday calendar built weeks in advance, is the exact thing a private equity firm correctly identified as a cash machine worth borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars against. It's also the exact thing the current owners are now converting into a subscription product that locks families in before they've even decided to visit. The business you think you're buying is a family restaurant with an arcade attached. The business you're actually buying is a recurring revenue entertainment company that happens to sell pizza, one that survived being owned by people who never set foot in a single dining room, and is now betting its future on getting you to sign up once instead of winning you over every single Saturday. Some operators are already building around that shift. Most are still selling one visit at a time. The gap between those two groups will only widen, one renewal, one renovation cycle, one skipped competitor visit at a time. And there's a version of this story that stops at private equity loaded a beloved brand with the debt and nearly killed it. That version is true. It's also incomplete. The more useful lesson is what happened after. A company with every excuse to fold instead figured out its real asset was never the pizza, and barely even the arcade cabinets. It was the relationship between a 9-year-old and the promise of a prize they haven't won yet. Every remodel, every trampoline zone, every membership tier since the bankruptcy has been an attempt to formalize that relationship into something that renews automatically instead of something that has to be re-earned one Saturday at a time. And it's a lesson that extends well past one mouse in one mascot costume. Any business built on a loyal recurring customer is a business someone will eventually try to buy with borrowed money, then hand the bill to the customer, the franchisee, or both. The name on the sign rarely tells you who actually owns the debt underneath it. Every business looks simple from the outside. The diner, the mall, the mouse in the mascot costume. It's only once you open up the numbers that you see what's actually holding it together. If you want to keep doing that, subscribe, because we're breaking down a new one every week. So, you still want to own a Chuck E. Cheese?